So I think we got to have tough conditions. Tell people to come out of the shadows. If they've committed a crime, deport them. No questions asked. They're gone. If they've been working and are law-abiding, we should say, here are the conditions for you staying. You have to pay a stiff fine because you came here illegally. You have to pay back taxes. And you have to try to learn English. And you have to wait in line.
I tell you what. The Trump team coming to town, we're going to take control January 20th, and people are going to be held accountable. We're going to be very transparent. We're going to get behind. What did the United Nations have to do with this open border crisis? Who in the administration, the Biden administration, opened the doors on this humanitarian crisis? What NGOs were involved in this? We're going to be very transparent, American people.
But when do you believe the FBI figured out that all of this was just one political campaign trying to take down another?
I think they knew right away. And the documents that we put out in the Nunes investigation, the Nunes memo, and the HPSI report on Russian active measures show that the FBI knew right away because their FISA abuse process, now that declassification process is complete, and your viewers can read it, that the FBI knew the information was fraudulent. They knew the credibility problems with Christopher Steele, and they knew the DNC through Fusion GPS and Perkins Coie were piping in tens of millions of dollars into the machine so that they could get up a FISA warrant on President Trump. So I think they knew right away, which is why I think the individuals at the head of the FBI need to be held accountable.
Now, folks, we all know the mainstream media and its left liberal policies are facing huge criticism. It's finally time for them to be called out. You know, in today's polarized world, discussions around the role of mainstream media and left liberal policies always evoke strong opinions. Critics argue that mainstream media always deviates from its responsibility to provide unbiased information. It always promotes, instead, these narratives that always align with specific ideological agendas.
Is there enough backbone there, do you think, to defeat multiple nominees?
I don't know. I think it's possible. And look, we saw it with Matt Gaetz already, and I think that I was actually surprised how quickly that happened. To me, Kash Patel, and I don't say this lightly, is the most dangerous nominee that we've seen yet to our democracy. I mean, you might think that having Pete Hegseth running the military is a greater level of danger because of his lack of experience, or Tulsi Gabbard at intelligence. But just as far as, you know, the threats to democracy that we were warning up about before the election, and Kash Patel was a key player inside the Trump White House.
This is a perfect example of the hypocrisy of the Biden administration. Their call for unity is a joke. If you start with what we started this conversation with, Strzok and Kleinsmith, I'm sure Kleinsmith's on his way to getting a presidential pardon, and maybe he'll be the next attorney general. There's one set of rules for them, and there's a different set of rules for us. Now, turning to the Defense Department, that's a great example. And you just named two individuals. Chris Miller and I appointed, scores of individuals, maybe hundreds, as we're entitled to the defense boards that help advise the Defense Department from business, innovation, science, technology, and policy. Now, here's the kicker, Maria. These appointments were all signed by Secretary of Defense Chris Miller. They are a legal standing order that is being actually ignored. And I'll give you one worse example, Maria. I was actually sworn in to the Defense Policy Board, and I received an email from the White House Liaison Office, which is a group of small people that represent the White House at the Defense Department for the Biden administration, that said, even though you were sworn in, we are pausing your onboarding process.
Similarly, left liberal policies are often rooted in ideals of equality and social justice, but some skeptics are calling this out. You know that mainstream media always played a pivotal role in shaping public opinion. Its reach and influence means that how stories are framed can significantly impact the political and cultural landscape. Critics argue that major media outlets have shifted away from impartial reporting to promote ideological narratives. During Trump's presidency, media outlets like CNN and MSNBC frequently emphasized controversies that were only surrounding his administration, often presenting them as sensationalism. People always said that this approach lacked balance, as it disproportionately focused on Trump's flaws while minimizing the achievements like economic growth and criminal justice reform. Contrast that, the Biden administration has been accused of receiving more lenient coverage, which we know is a fact. This discrepancy also fuels claims that the mainstream media prioritizes partisan loyalty over journalistic integrity. This issue extends just beyond political coverage, though, because during the crisis, several huge, and you know which outlets we're talking about, media outlets were accused of sensationalizing the worst-case scenarios, just to drive engagement. It created this huge, unnecessary fear and panic and inform the public about a global crisis. That's essential. Critics contend that the relentless focus on rising tolls of death and divisive narratives around mandates and all this just contributed to public distrust. We could see people like Joe Rogan going from the far left to now completely going the other way to being a huge advocate for President Trump. But media outlets have appeared more invested in their driving clicks and ratings than fostering constructive dialogue or presenting nuanced perspectives.
My goodness gracious. Yes, the Republicans are going to control the House of Representatives. But if all the current results hold up, we're looking at a record small majority after the Novembers in the last 90 years. You have to go all the way back since the Herbert Hoover administration to find an even smaller majority after the November elections. We're talking about the Republicans with 220 seats, Democrats with 215 if the current House results hold. And keep in mind that this will drop lower if Stefanik Waltz or others like Matt Gaetz leave the Congress.
I don't know where they get the constitutional ground to do that or the gall, but this call for unity is garbage. And I'll give you one stark example that struck me on my way out of the Pentagon. They terminated my employees who were on paternity and maternity leave because they were appointees by President Trump.
And not only with the rise of social media platforms, it kind of made this issue even worse. Every platform besides Twitter, basically, or X, has these algorithms that amplify sensationalist content, polarize the audience, and with such environment, independent and conservative voices often claim they are marginalized. It reinforces perceptions that mainstream media operates as a gatekeeper for left liberal ideology. These left liberal policies are often seeking to address systemic issues like inequality and climate change and healthcare. But while these are well-intentioned, everyone knows that these initiatives are overlooked practical challenges. It also results in unintended consequences that undermine the effectiveness. One of the primary critiques of the left liberal economic policies is their reliance on high taxation and extensive, huge government intervention. Like we all know that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden just want to take our rights away from the First, Second, Third, and even the Fifth Amendment.
I do think we have a crisis of especially young men in this country, and they're in many ways disconnected from the rest of their families, disconnected from their communities, disconnected from our political culture, disconnected from our civil culture. And that's a real problem for a society that depends on all of us to be engaged and working together to make it as good of a country and as good of a society as it can be. I think the Democrats in this election made men feel like that the patriarchy is over, boys, and we're going to put you in the back seat for a while and you're just going to have to accept it, without any thought to the ramifications of telling people who are out honestly trying to make a living, provide for their families, be good husbands, be good fathers. When you tell people who are doing their level best that either A, it's not good enough, or B, you're part of the problem, what do you expect? And then finally, as a political tactic, the attempt to put walls on the ticket, and that was going to somehow solve all of the problems that had been built up for years, was ridiculous, because it turns out Walz was the last person that men wanted to hear from. And I remember at the beginning of that whole campaign, when they put him on, I sat right here, and people were like, oh, they got camouflaged hats. They're going to be wearing them in the deer stands this fall. And I think to your point that you just made, that was not, that idea that was not formulated by a bunch of dudes who actually go deer hunting.
But while the state has made strides in renewable energy and technological innovation, the U.S. is grappling with skyrocketing housing costs, huge homelessness, and an exodus of businesses that are leaving America due to high taxes and regulatory burdens. But now with President Trump coming back in, things will change. Policies like increased minimum wages that are aimed at reducing income inequality always harm small businesses and lead to job losses. These extensive welfare programs that everybody on the Democratic Party is talking about provide a safety net for the vulnerable. And the risk is fostering dependency rather than encouraging self-sufficiency. If they want a country that's a communist country, they can go to Cuba or they can go to China. Instead of trying to force this down Americans' throat, critics argue that liberal policies often prioritize short-term relief over sustainable solutions.
And if they don't want to help, instead of deciding don't help, fine, don't help. But don't get in our way. And I've said this for the past week over and over again. Do not harbor and conceal an illegal alien, knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien from us because it's a crime. Don't impede us because it's a crime. Don't obstruct because it's a crime. If you want to sit aside and let us do your job of securing the communities, fine, we'll do that. But don't cross that line.
It creates economic systems that are less resilient in the face of global competition. But with climate change, well, we can go on and on about that, but let's really get into social policies here. Liberal policies are often emphasizing equity, the idea of ensuring equal outcomes rather than merely providing equal opportunities. Affirmative action policies, for instance, are always aimed to address historical injustice by prioritizing marginalized groups in education and employment. Critics also argue that such policies are always going to undermine meritocracy and breed resentment among those who feel disadvantaged. But instead of focusing on quotas and preferential treatment, skeptics advocate for systemic reforms that address root causes, improving education in underserved communities.
I tell you what, the Trump team coming to town, we're going to take control January 20th, and people are going to be held accountable. We're going to be very transparent. We're going to get behind. What did the United Nations have to do with this open border crisis? Who in the administration, the Biden administration, opened the doors on this humanitarian crisis? What NGOs were involved in this? We're going to be very transparent to American people, and we're going to tell them the truth what happened on this border. Again, by design, and we're going to let the American people know who was involved, why, and hold them accountable.
This will help, and they are arguing that this long-term solutions promoting self-reliance are more effective than policies that are just handouts. But the role of the big government is actually really key here. A central critique is that the left liberal policies are hugely relying on expansive government intervention. From healthcare to education, liberals also advocate for the federal programs to address societal challenges. While these initiatives also aim to provide safety nets and reduce inequality, they're just inefficient and a total waste of money. Like the public education in many liberal states receive a lot of funding, yet student outcomes often remain stagnant. Critics attribute this to the lack of accountability and overemphasis on ideological curriculums rather than core academic skills. Like healthcare, for instance, and policies that are aimed to expand coverage like the Medicare for All, the concerns are only about feasibility, cost, and quality of care. Opponents of big government argue that decentralization and private sector innovation are more effective in addressing societal issues.
Andrew, I just want to start first with you and just get your reaction to this news tonight.
Yeah, well, it's a terrible development for the men and women of the FBI and also for the nation that depends on a highly functioning, professional, independent Federal Bureau of Investigation. The fact that Kash Patel is profoundly unqualified for this job is not even like a matter for debate. So I think what we should really be thinking about right now is what does this signal in terms of Donald Trump's intent for the FBI.
And the dangerous symbolism, let's not forget about this, symbiosis, the interplay between mainstream media and left liberal policies. It has always amplified concerns about bias and accountability. For instance, the media's portrayal of climate policies, for example, often focuses on the urgency of action while downplaying the economic trade-offs of it. Like the coverage of social issues always highlight the most progressive perspectives without adequately exploring alternative options. But critiques of the mainstream media and left liberal policies are not a wholesale rejection of their goals or values. It's just to reflect concerns about their execution and bias.
Was come up with by a bunch of people who've never met a dude that actually goes deer hunting. But when you try to put that kind of window dressing on a real communications problem or a real relationship problem, it gets exposed immediately.